You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name and politics is our game. And we will be doing politics this evening because we take you to clips and interviews with the players in the 10th Congressional District. That's Dan Seals, Jay Footlik, and Congressman Mark Kirk. Dan Seals ran against Congressman Mark Kirk in the 2006 general election and almost beat him. He lost 53 to 47 to Congressman Kirk, and that was the closest anybody came since 2000 when Kirk won by only 2 points over Lauren Beth Gash in what was an open seat, and in 2002 and 2004 it was a blowout. Dan Seals now is facing competition in the Democratic primary from Jay Footlik. The 10th Congressional District consists of various suburbs north and northwest of Chicago, starting with Kenilworth and then going through portions of Wilmette and Winnetka and Glencoe and Highland Park and going almost all the way to the border of Wisconsin, and then areas or suburbs west of those areas as well. First, we take you to an interview with Jay Footlik that I did after a League of Women Voters forum highlighting the few substantive areas where Footlik and Seals may differ, or what appears to be very few areas, and then a shorter interview with Dan Seals talking about some of the differences between his opponent Jay Footlik and himself. Seals has less interview time on the show than Footlik simply because Seals gave us less time to work with. Then we take you to a segment of the League of Women Voters Forum, that's Winnetka, Northfield, and Kenilworth League, forum on January 10th in Northfield, with Seals and Footlik discussing in a segment or a portion of that forum the Iraq War. And you'll see it appears to be quite similar views that are held by Seals and Footlik on the war, but very different styles and experience and expertise that they would, or at least they say they would apply to end the war should they be first nominated in this primary and then elected in the general election. Our thanks go to Nancy Marcus and her League of Women Voter colleagues for allowing us to film and then edit that forum for use in the show that we're bringing you this evening. Enjoy the segment, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes with more on the Democratic primary and indeed getting into the general election in that 10th Congressional District. Speaking with Jay Footlik, candidate in the 10th Congressional District Democratic primary, and we're approaching that primary, which is in February 5th. His opponent, of course, is Dan Seals. On the issue of Israel, Jay, do you view Israel as an ally of the United States, or should the United States continue to be an ally of the United States, or should it be more even-handed? And is there a difference, as you see it, between your opponent, Dan Seals, and you on that issue?
There is no question that Israel is one of our most important allies for a variety of reasons. Shared values, democracy, freedom, respect for the rights of minorities and women and so forth, and of course for our continued parallel fight in the war on terror. I do not believe that an even-handed policy is what this nation should be moving towards. We stand with our allies, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in the Korean Peninsula, whether it's in other trouble spots around the world. And Israel is, of course, as I said, one of our most important and steadfast allies. With that said, I do believe that we should be more involved in the region and more involved than this administration has been in the search for peace and stability and security between Israel and the Palestinians and Israel and other Arab neighbors and countries.
Do you see a difference between your opponent, Dan Seals, and you on that issue of whether the U.S. should continue to be an ally as opposed to be more even-handed with respect to Israel?
Well, certainly his previous statements during the last cycle, when he was asked in a conflict between Israel and Iran, where would he stand? He said he would fall on the side of peace or come down the side of peace. We stand firmly with our ally Israel. We always have, we always should. So I do believe there's a difference, and again, there's one of experience. Dan Seals talks about a long, unequivocal longstanding commitment to the state of Israel. He discovered Israel within the context of his campaign last cycle and perhaps paid one visit there. I've lived there. I've worked there. My wife served in the IDF. I have long-standing relationships and have worked side by side with many of Israel's leaders from across the spectrum and many of the leaders throughout the region, all in the effort to try and find more security, more stability, and more peace for the people of the region.
You have said you would like to see people have an opportunity to deal with to get health care if they can't by getting into the by getting into the federal employee system. Your opponent has suggested they should have the opportunity to get into the Medicare system. Do you see that as a significant difference on how you would deal with health care?
I do. As I said before, I think when was the last time anyone heard a member of Congress complaining about the health care they received? With that said, I do believe that by giving opportunities for people who don't like their current health care system, perhaps, or who don't have insurance to buy into the federal employee health benefit program, they could get the coverage that they lack right now or that they desire at a lower cost and price in a way that delivers higher quality of care, more choices, and more comprehensive coverage than they would under a system that would expend Medicare, which is what my primary opponent is calling for.
You've said you favored, I think you said you favored a phased withdrawal of troops from Iraq. Is there a time period or timetable by which you think that withdrawal should occur, and do you think you differ with your opponent Dan Seals on that issue?
I do believe that we can start a withdrawal within about 90 days, and do believe that, again, with political will and the right program in place, that we can withdraw most of our troops in a gradual, phased way by the end of 2008. But you're not going to get there by saying that we need NATO troops to come in, which is what my primary opponent has called for. 16 out of the 26 or so NATO members have sent troops. Most have withdrawn those troops. I don't know if he has a secret plan to get them back in or believes they have their own fighting force, which of course they don't. He also talks about the Biden plan. Again, I differ there. I don't believe that the Biden plan is right for the situation we're in right now, perhaps at a more stable period of time when the Shia and Sunni areas have been able to solidify perhaps than the Biden plan would be called for. I believe that we need to shift to geographic constituencies, which would give people in the various locales and communities a greater stake in building security, first of all. Second of all, I would focus on the Murtha plan, which would take most of our troops, or many of our troops, out of harm's way in the middle of cities and would station them offshore where they would be rapidly deployable if needed in case of emergencies or crises. And third, I would dramatically step up our diplomacy to try and get regional players like Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Egypt and others who should be playing a larger role in this conflict to do so.
As you know, 15 years ago you were working to help elect Bill Clinton to be President of the United States. The slogan then was, "It's the economy, stupid." I think that was his slogan. 15 years later, is that your slogan, "It's the economy, stupid"?
Well, I do believe there's increasing concern about recession. I do believe, as I go around the district talking to people, that people are really concerned about job security right now and about their ability to meet their mortgage payments because of the mortgage crisis right now, or to help send their kids to college with rising college costs and tuition and so forth. And yes, I do believe that Americans are concerned about the economy right now, and we ought to be focusing on ways to help stimulate the economy and help give middle-class taxpayers some relief.
Thank you so much. Jay Footlik,
very much.
candidate in the Democrat. We're speaking here with Dan Seals, 10th Congressional District Democratic primary candidate. Just finished a forum with his opponent, Jay Footlik. Dan, what is it mostly that differentiates you from your opponent, Jay Footlik, in this 10th Congressional District Democratic primary?
The difference is experience. I've been in Washington, D.C. long enough to know how it actually works, but I've been outside Washington, D.C. long enough to know how it should work. I think this election is about change, and that's why I'm running.
On the war, is there a big difference between you and Jay Footlik on the war as to what you would do if elected to Congress?
No, I think we're both pushing for an exit for the war. There might be some differences on the margins about how we pursue that, but ultimately we're both looking for a phased withdrawal from the war. And this Congressman, Mark Kirk, has voted to get us into the war and refuses to vote to get us out of the war. The thing that strikes me most about the Congressman's behavior is that he went to visit the President last year, not to say, "Mr. President, let's change the course in the war," or "Mr. President, let's stay the course in the war," but rather, "Mr. President, this war is hurting my re-election chances." So we need to get him out of office if we're going to have a real exit plan.
All right, thank you so much, Dan Seals, for taking the time to talk to the viewers of Public Affairs.
Nice talking to you.
What is your position on the war in Iraq, and what steps will you take if elected regarding Iraq?
When I lived and worked in that part of the world, I have extensive experience and expertise, relationships that span Israelis and Arabs throughout the region. I believe that each and every day we are over in Iraq undermines our safety and our security. And I believe we need to get our troops home safely and responsibly so we can meet the many other challenges that are posed from that part of the world. I mentioned some of them in my introduction. First and foremost, I believe that we need to shift to geographic constituencies. Right now, the current administration has a system that only encourages division by focusing on sectarian communities, whether you're Shia or Sunni, pro-Ba'athist or pro-Iranian. It does not encourage communities to come together. We're seeing a bit of communities coming together, crossing sectarian lines in places like Mosul, which is sort of the Chicago of Iraq. It's the third largest city in Iraq. But we need to do more to encourage that. That's not going to happen by remote control. And that leads to the second part. We need to engage in much more effective regional diplomacy. The Saudis have the best friend in the White House in George Bush and Dick Cheney. Well, let's push the Saudis to start picking up the tab instead of the American taxpayer. Instead of building bridges and schools and roads in Iraq, we can use that money to build those things right here at home in our own community. Let's get the Saudis, let's get the Egyptians that we give $2 billion a year to in aid, let's get others to start helping out, and let's talk to the Iranians and the Syrians as well with tough, muscular diplomacy and economic sanctions if they're not willing to help out. They've been singularly unhelpful in helping us try and get our soldiers into a safer position. The last thing I would do is look at the Murtha plan, to remove some of our forces from the city centers where they're just drawing more extremists. We have chased moderates into the hands of extremists. Let's place them offshore so they can respond rapidly in the case of need to protect our soldiers and our vital and strategic interests in that part of the world. And let's get our troops home safely and responsibly once the security situation and political situation stabilizes.
Thank you. Mr. Seals?
This war was misguided and mishandled from the beginning. It was unnecessary to go there. It's cost us too many lives, too much money, and it's actually, according to our own government, according to the National Intelligence Estimate, made us less safe. I think that we need to start on a path to getting out of this war. I support a phased withdrawal from the conflict. I think we could start bringing our troops home immediately, but that we could phase it out over about a year, because that's what our military planners tell us it would take to do so responsibly and safely. This also gives additional pressure on the Iraqi government to make the decisions that they have to make if they're going to have a country. They need to decide how they're going to if they're going to have a military that's going to function, what they'll do with the oil revenues, and of course if they're going to actually be a country at all, as they still seem to be in the midst of a civil war. I also think this is good for our own interests. We can't address conflicts in Iran or any other hotspot in the world if we're going to have our military pinned down in Iraq. So I'd like to move our troops out in a responsible but direct way so that we can further our own interests and actually make the world safer and more stable. I think that's what our goal should be.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the first portion of the show. We now take you to a Winnetka Kenilworth Northfield League forum, to a segment on healthcare of that forum, and then to an interview that I did with Jay Footlik after the student-run Stevenson High School forum for the 10th Congressional District Democratic primary candidates. Dan Seals was unavailable after the forum for an interview, and then we'll go back to closing statements made at the League of Women Voters Forum in Northfield, closing statements by the 10th Congressional District Democratic primary candidates, Jay Footlik and Dan Seals, and then we go to a clip from a town hall meeting that was held on October 20th, 2007, held by 8th-year Republican incumbent Congressman Mark Stephen Kirk. And you'll see at the forum, Congressman Kirk was challenged from someone in the audience about his views on the Iraq War, and you'll get a good chance to see his response, including his position on the Iraq War. Enjoy these segments on the 10th Congressional District race, and we'll be back with a short close.
Coverage. What changes, if any, would you favor to the delivery of health care in the U.S.?
I want to change our healthcare system. I want to have a major overhaul. We spend 16% of our GDP on healthcare. When you look at the cost, 31% of our spend is just wrapped up in administrative costs. I think we need to overhaul the system. We're spending twice as much as other industrialized countries, and yet we're leaving 47 million Americans without coverage. Here are the steps that I would take. Number one, if you are happy with your health care insurance, great. Let's not change a thing. Let's leave that alone. But for those who aren't, we need to have an affordable alternative. So I think number two, we should have that by providing something like Medicare, expanding that out and making that available to 47 million Americans who aren't satisfied with what they have, as well as to the millions of other Americans who would like to see some choice. Third, we should make health care portable. I know too many people who feel like they are trapped in a job just for the benefits. And I also know too many companies that are falling apart under the weight of the health care burden. I like to have companies focus on what they do best, which is making money and providing jobs. And I would like people to be able to take their health care with them wherever they go. If we do that, we'll actually be able to bring the cost down overall, because remember, the 47 million Americans who don't have insurance today are using the emergency room as their primary care provider. And we can also bring more money into the system by having those folks pay into the system and help carry some of their own weight. Those are some of the changes that I would make.
Thank you, Mr. Footlik.
So here's an area where we have fundamental agreement and disagreement. Agreement that all Americans ought to have access to quality health care. I know from my own experience as a kid how difficult that can be for a family. I know even later on in life when I had to choose between paying for my own health insurance or paying down my student loans, and it was pretty tough to do both, and I went for years without health insurance. With that said, it's a $2.1 trillion industry. 20 to 30% of that is waste. That's $400 to $600 billion in waste. We can do things to find greater efficiency in this system. We can convert to electronic medical records that will give us greater care and more efficiency. We could cut out a lot of excess paperwork. We could focus on preventive care. But most importantly, I agree that if you like the health insurance you currently have, if you're fortunate enough to have it, you ought to be able to keep it, and we ought to be able to preserve that choice. If you don't, however, I believe that we ought to extend the right for everyone to join in to the Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan. When was the last time any of you heard a member of Congress complain about the health care they received, right? And it's all on our tax dollars. And there's a fundamental departure here. My opponent believes that we should expand Medicare. I think Medicare has worked well, but it would be overburdened. There's too much bureaucracy there, and I think the better way of delivering universal health care is going to Federal Employee Benefit Systems Plan. You would have lower costs, you'd have greater choice, and ultimately better care for all Americans.
We're standing here speaking with Jay Footlik, who is running in the Democratic primary, which is coming up on February 5th. He is running in the 10th Congressional District Democratic primary, taking on Dan Seals. Just finished a debate tonight, or at least a forum, at Stevenson High School. One of the questions that came up was about the first bit of legislation you would sign, or you would approve of, you would vote for, or at least you were looking for. And I think you said about the war, because I think Dan Seals has spoken about that, how important it was. You said that's going to take a while to work out. You were certainly for getting all the troops out of Iraq, but you went to health care. Is that a more important issue in the 10th Congressional District as you see it in this Democratic primary?
I think it's an issue that it's not necessarily more important. It's an issue where I think, as a freshman legislator, I would have the ability to make an impact that would have an impact even beyond just our own district. It would have a wider impact on the country. 47 million Americans are without health care. I believe we need to address this crisis. I believe it's not for lack of ideas that there isn't health insurance or access to quality health care right now. It's for lack of political will and so forth. And so that's not to diminish the importance of the Iraq War. I think we all understand that that drains our economy, that it decreases our ability to address so many other priorities here at home. Most importantly, our men and women in uniform are paying with their blood and making the ultimate sacrifice. But there are a lot of external factors that I think would go into creating the conditions that will enable us to withdraw in a safe and responsible fashion. And when I say enable us to do that in that particular manner, I believe first and foremost that we need to shift to geographic constituencies in Iraq itself. I believe we should look at the Murtha Plan, getting our troops, or many of our troops, out of city centers, out of harm's way where they are attracting more and more extremists, place them offshore so that they can respond when the need arises, to protect our men and women there and other assets that we have on the ground. And third, that we ought to be investing in more regional diplomacy. All of that will take time to do. I believe that we can start a phased withdrawal within the next 60 to 90 days, but it's going to take some time to get the rest of our troops out safely and responsibly. And as I said, because of the dependent factor being a lot of external factors in Iraq itself, some of the regional parties that I mentioned before, the Saudis, the Iranians, etc., we have to look at some other issues pressing here at home right now. I believe that has the ability to impact more Americans than just about any other issue out there right now.
What's the most important issue that differentiates you from Dan Seals in this 10th Congressional District Democratic primary?
Well, anyone can talk about delivering change, right? The solutions to a lot of these questions, whether it's getting out of Iraq or providing greater health care for more Americans or energy dependence and so forth, energy security, anyone can talk about that. The solutions are not found in 7-second sound bites. What you need is someone with a track record of delivering change. I've done that. I've built an organization that has helped diminish our dependence on oil. I've worked and lived in the Middle East on issues that can help create greater stability and security for the people living there and, of course, for our interests and ourselves here at home. I've worked in the government, in the White House, serving President Clinton, and in that capacity worked on a whole range of domestic and foreign policy issues. I have a track record of accomplishment. Talking about change doesn't get you there. You need someone who's capable of delivering change.
Thank you so much, Jay Footlik, running in the 10th Congressional District Democratic primary. Thanks so much, Jay, for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I'm running for Congress because there are substantive differences between my opponent and me, and those differences will determine our ability to get things done. For the past 7 years, the voice the nation has heard from our district has been pro-war, anti-healthcare, and apathetic towards the middle class. That's not in line with our values. We need big changes, and I'm prepared to make those changes. From health security to energy security to homeland security, I've been working to bring changes that have improved our quality of life and that will safeguard our way of life. I've lived and worked in the Middle East. Nothing is more desperately needed in Congress and in Washington today than someone that knows this region inside and out. I will put this expertise to use on my very first day in Congress to help get us out of Iraq safely and responsibly and restore America's leadership role in the world. My efforts, though, to change this country didn't begin and end with my time in the White House, and I didn't discover the Democratic Party when I decided to run for this seat in Congress. I've been working since I was a young boy here at home to elect Democrats like Ab Mikva and Paul Simon and Adlai Stevenson. I know how to wage a tough, effective, winning campaign. This community is important to me. I was born and raised here. I've chosen to raise my family here, and my amazing little girl and another one on the way in the not-too-distant future only reaffirms my desire to do all I can to bring positive change to our community and to our environment. So visit my website, jfootlik.com, come to one of our daily meet and greets, and give me a chance to show you why I am the only candidate who can beat Mark Kirk come November of 2008. It's time for us to get off the bench and start building this nation into the beacon of hope and freedom that it used to be. Let's do this together. I'm asking for your help and for your vote on February 5th. Thank you very much.
So my campaign is a grassroots campaign. So we do a lot of door-to-door work and meeting voters. It wasn't too long ago I was walking down the street and a man comes out of his backyard and says, hey, you Dan Seals? You got to think before answering these questions sometimes. He had a crew cut, a grimy shirt from working in his yard, maybe he's mid-50s. But I said yes, and he walked up to me, took off his glasses, and burst into tears. He told me that his son had just got accepted into a program into the Army, and that while he was proud that his son had found something that he could belong to and felt good about, he was worried about his son going to Iraq. And he said that he just wished that the Iraqis could do a little bit more to carry their end of the bargain. Look, this is more than just a debate about ideas. Real people's lives are at stake. People who are serving, certainly in Iraq, but also the millions of Americans without health insurance, who are looking for jobs, who are having a harder time making ends meet. This election is about those people. And while I certainly want your vote and support in this coming election on February 5th, the fact is, no matter who you support, no matter what party you support, please get involved, stay involved, bring a friend. There is too much riding on this election for us to walk home tonight happy with our thoughts and our questions, but not really willing to work for real change. I thank you for coming out tonight. I thank you for the support you've given me in the past, and I certainly encourage you and hope that you will work hard in the future. That is certainly what I plan to do. Thank you so much.
Well, actually, let's have...
Actually, I don't think you've left myself or many other constituents much of a choice. My name is Michael. I'm a registered voter in Deerfield and a graduate of Deerfield High School like yourself, and an organizer with Citizen Action in Illinois. Myself and many other constituents were very disappointed that we weren't notified about this event after submitting in-person invitations to your office to host a town hall meeting. And myself and about at least half of the other people here have come to ask you if you truly want an end to the war in Iraq. When are you going to pledge to set firm deadlines to bring the troops home?
I'm not. So give you a straight answer.
Why not?
Right. I believe that you need to wrap up this mission, but wrap it up in the way that never causes us to go back. I will tell you, as someone in the military, from military families, the one thing they will not forgive is a botched exit job that triggers a third war in the Middle East. That is unforgivable. And so I think we need to wrap this mission up, but wrap it up in a way that never causes Americans to go back.
Today, when you're everywhere talking about we have to cut entitlements, we have to cut programs here, but there's no talk about, you know, the endless expenses overseas.
Well, in my view, we need to wind up. We need to wind up the war. Yeah,
Just to make us happy, could you give us some kind of...
So for example, right now, we're bringing the surge troops out. But in my view, we need to just keep going. Most of the missions left in Iraq are political. And it is inappropriate for Americans in uniform to be accomplishing them. In the end, in my view, just about everybody in Iraq, you know, everybody in Iraq is very aware of U.S. politics right now. They'll be less aware when we're gone, but right now they're very aware that the Americans will hold an election in November. And they're very aware that the American people want to wind this up. Most Iraqi leaders that I've talked to already assume the United States is largely gone in 2009. And so there are some parties in Iraq that feel that they will be hurt when the Americans leave. And so they are now, the smart ones, especially in Anbar province, are cutting their best deal. Because they realize, I better cut my best deal now because the Americans are leaving. From what I have seen and discussions that I have witnessed among military leaders, the troop withdrawals are going to continue beyond bringing the surge troops home and keep going. Okay.
Well, that's the show, folks, and that's the 10th Congressional District Democratic primary between Dan Seals and Jay Footlik. There are some substantive policy differences between Seals and Footlik on health care, perhaps on Israel, and perhaps other issues. But the race really seems to be about, at least for Democratic voters, who has the best experience, expertise, style, and tone to take on and beat Congressman Mark Kirk in the fall 2008 general election. And it'll be interesting to see in that 2008 general election whether that race becomes about a referendum on on George Bush, on the economy, and on the war, or will it be about which candidate provides the best independent, thoughtful, experienced leadership, something that people often say the 10th Congressional District is about. Thanks so much for watching Public Affairs, and we will see you again next week on Public Affairs.